Good evening. Thanks for coming and attending tonight's seminar. We are very grateful and very honored to have with us here tonight Professor Nauro Campos, who's a professor at the University College London. And if I'm not mistaken, Professor Campos's interests are in the comparative economics sphere and economic integration. Professor Campos has had a long and very varied career. Prior to University College London, he was at Brunel University, also in the UK, and the University of Newcastle, and then before that at Paris University. And if I'm recalling correctly, you were also at the University, Cal State University too, back Professor Campos is a protege, shall we say, of the well-known Professor Richard Easterly, who I believe was one of your committee way back when. But you've done so much work in between your own, and today we're very pleased to be hearing some of your latest stuff on what I guess you and your co-authors call the political view. I like to think of it as the regime smile, but it's an interesting finding. I think we're going to be very enlightened by what you have to say today. Professor Campos is also, I should point out, had many interconnections with the policy world as well. I believe the Central Bank of Finland, yes, the Bank of Finland, and also with the UK government's development, what was it called, program or?
So it was a ministry.
The ministry, yes, of international. That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. So we are very pleased and thankful that you could give us a talk tonight. So for those of you who are coming in via Zoom, we will have a Q&A session around after the 40-minute point. Please feel free to post your questions on the Q&A window here in Zoom, and I will, present them in the order which they arrive. I may have to edit them out for time, but trust that your questions will be looked at in this Q&A window. Those of you who are here will have a Q&A after our Professor Campos has had his say. So with no further ado, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for the very kind words. I'm going to say that I was also a Fulbright fellow at Homewood campus at Johns Hopkins. That will show my age because I will have to tell you the year. Then I will skip that part. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a huge pleasure to be here today. This is joint work with Professor Fabrizio Coricelli from the Paris School of Economics and Marco Frigerio from the University of Siena, just down the road. And the paper looks at the relationship between political and economic development, democracy and per capita democracy, and growth. And we try to revisit this literature. Then what we do is basically we try to take stock critically of what economists know about this relationship, and we have accumulated a lot of knowledge in the last 20 years or so, but with a concern of building bridges. None of us is a political scientist, but we think that political scientists know a lot more about democracies than we do. We have been reading very carefully the contributions and try to build bridges, accommodate their knowledge and try to progress and push our understanding a bit further by doing that. Okay, then to take on board what political scientists have been doing, and the emphasis here is, of course, because of the political view, non-linear relationship yes, you can infer that. The focus is on the shape of the relationship and an understanding of the mechanisms, reasons. The motivation is, of course, the rise of populism, current moment of huge democratic backsliding that we're living through, provides kind of an additional push to do this. Then what did we do? We basically revisit this literature. We postulate the possibility that the relationship is non-linear, which is bread and butter for political science, but I will try to show you completely foreign to economies. And the way we do it is we bring in more countries, longer time window, and both improved measures of democracy. This whole literature uses polity. I mean, we use VDEM. We think it's a better measure. The literature has paid a lot of attention to measurement issues. Indeed, the reason for using dummy variables for democracy that economists like so much is because of measurement error. Then we extend that concern to economic activity, and I will show you some very new results. And this we haven't seen, to the best of our knowledge. This literature has not looked at this possibility of measurement error in economic activity area. Then we will have results based on night lights also. Okay, and we use exactly the same range of econometric estimators that the literature uses, and then our contribution is actually, instead of further sophistication, is we simplify. I'll show you how we try to do that. Okay, and that's what we did. Our main results, as you can imagine, I mean, it's a very simple paper with a very simple message. The relationship is, I mean, we agree with the whole previous literature and argue that the relationship is indeed causal, but instead of linear, U-shaped. Okay, that's the big difference. And the headline result is that intermediate regimes that come into play because of the abandonment of the dummy variable for democracy, these intermediate regimes perform significantly worse. How worse? There's a familiar number in this literature, 20% over the long run worse. Okay, that's quite sizable and very robust results, as I will try to show you. One of the additional benefits of relaxing this assumption of the linearity assumption is a tighter link between the econometric results and the theoretical framework. Then we identify, like multiple theoretical pieces in this literature, the key role of social political instability or social unrest. The twist we apply here is that we think of political instability as having a political facet, but also a policy facet in the sense of quality of public policies, if you want. And when these two come together, the implications in terms of productivity are quite natural to think of. Okay, then if you want to see how it looks like, this U-shaped relationship, as you can see, we have on the right-hand side, the quality variable, and democracy measured by quality, which is the way the whole literature does. And on the left-hand side, democracy measured by VDEM, which is a newer, improved measure. And that is what you mean by a U-shaped relationship between political and economic development. Then the outline of this, yes?
Are you using panel data here?
Oh, yes, I am, yes. I'll give you the details very quickly. Yes, we'll be using this 162 countries yearly from 1960 to 2018, which is longer than most of the literature. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit about the econometric identification briefly. Okay, then the outline is, this is the introduction and the motivation. I think you got a quick insight on what the main results are. What I'll try to do is I will assume nobody in the rooms know anything about what economists have been doing about democracy, which usually it's a mistake, but I will run the risk and tell you, kind of try to summarize this very, very large literature. I'll detail 3 or 4 key econometric choices we have to make in terms of the identification and the estimation, and then I will show you our results. Okay, it's written robustness, but I will present in terms of, what are the new results? What did you get by relaxing this linearity assumption? Okay, and it's not going to be an econometric presentation. I'm not going to keep showing 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 20, 150 times. What I'll do is, instead of showing you the same result over and over again, estimating it differently, I will show how extensive this relaxation is, right? What it brings us that you haven't seen in this literature. Okay, very good. And then I will conclude. Okay, great. Then let me tell you quickly about what economists have been doing in terms of democracy and political institutions. And as I said, already indicated, it's quite important for this paper. The emphasis in bulk of the econometric literature by economists is to treat democracy as 1-0. Okay, them as a dummy variable, but that's clearly not the case when you look at the theoretical work that has been done in terms of this relationship. There's a whole range of models, and here just 3 or 4 of them. And as you can see on the right-hand side, all of them with more than 2 regimes, okay, which is the 1-0. Okay, then that is the way we think about the relationship between politics and economic development is definitely not 1-0, not binary. Okay, that is the first point. The second point is that all of these models, there are a number of mechanisms and channels. But we like to, if we have to pick one that is quite frequent, we like to think of that would be social unrest. Okay, and the key word here is threat of revolution. Okay, and as soon as I say threat of revolution, which is social political stability, you know exactly what I'm referring to, because these are very, very well-known models that have been around now for 20 years. And of course, there are other angles in this literature, other elements, but we like to think that this is the key aspect. Okay, and the reasoning, of course, is as I said at the beginning, you have social and political instability plus instability of public policies. You can think of it as variability or ineffectiveness of structural reforms, for example, and the combination of the two, the interaction, will result in productivity losses. Okay, and that's kind of the story, right? Yeah.
What is SPI?
SPI is the social political instability. Sorry, I apologize for that. Yeah. Shorthand for social unrest. Okay. All right. Then this is kind of the economic theory. The political science theory, if you want, is entirely on hybrid regimes. Okay, and they have a huge literature in the last 20, 25 years, and we have different adjectives that are employed to characterize these intermediate regimes. But it's very rare to find political science scholars talking about political regimes in a kind of 0-1 mode. Okay, this is really rare. In terms of the empirical literature in economics, I would like to do 2 things. Quickly tell you what the bulk of the literature does, and then characterize the frontier. The bulk of the literature is very nicely summarized by a paper by Collegras et al., which does a meta-regression analysis of this democracy and growth literature. They collect about 200 papers, 2,000 estimates, and try to kind of provide a quantitative lit review of this literature, of this bulk of literature. And they find that, yeah, democracy has a positive and direct effect on growth, but they also find 2 other things that are quite important for us. The first one is that more than 90% of those estimates use a binary indicator of democracy, 1-0, which for us is an important point. And the second one is that there is a small minority of these papers that actually entertain the possibility of a nonlinear relationship. There are actually a couple of rather well-known papers in the 90s, looking at the nonlinear relationship. But usually, they quantify and argue that that's about 10% of the literature looks at nonlinearity, and they do argue that most of those results are not statistically significant, different from zero. Okay, then that's the basis we use to justify the notion that nonlinearity have not been exploited, explored, studied carefully by quantists. Okay, then this is the bulk of the literature. I mean, where is the frontier? And there are many, many ways of depicting the frontier, but I will use a couple of papers and I will stress the issue of causality. Okay, then the argument here is about modernization theory and whether or not the direction of causality is one way you can read this literature, is whether or not it goes from political to economic development or the other way around. I mean, political scientists, starting with Lipset, stress the other way around. Economists, these two papers illustrate a very kind of stark reading of that literature. And the argument that Semoglu and co-authors have put forward is that, well, there is a causal relationship not going from economic to political development, that's DAR 2008, but going from political to economic development, that's the Journal of Political Economy 2009. Okay. There are a couple of very, very interesting additions to characterizing the frontier. One of them is 2020. I mean, they estimate that democracies cause 20% increase in per capita GDP over the long run. All of it, again, using 1-0 dummy variables for democracy in the whole literature. And the second thing that they do, which is very, very interesting, is stories about the channels. Okay, right? I mean, what are the factors that help understand this relationship between political and economic development? And here, one way of summarizing their findings is that there are like three types of findings, if you want. The first one, in which there's a lot of evidence showing kind of strong support. Then these are the kind of variables for which they find strong support. The story here is that, well, democratic countries implement more structural reforms, implement better quality of public policies, and that generates growth. Democratic countries raise more taxes over GDP than non-democratic countries, and that public good provision, more growth. Same thing with enrollment, right? I mean, accumulation of human capital. Democracies lead to supply of education and the accumulation of human capital, and that leads to growth. And that's kind of the headline results for them. Some under the category, some support, but not much. I mean, they find investment in the trade openings and social unrest, again, with quite weak citizen support. And then no effect for productivity. Okay, and that is kind of one way of looking at the frontier of what economies have been doing in terms of democracy and growth. Okay, then I don't know how I'm doing time-wise.
You're fine. Keep at it.
Okay, I'll
We have about 20, 25 minutes.
okay, all right. Okay. Then let me tell you, I mean, what are the kind of key parameters or key choices we made in terms of econometric identification. Then the data sources and coverage. I mean, we have 162 countries between 1960 and 2018, yearly data. Political regimes, I mean, we use at the extreme quality and the end, these two measures of political development. And we follow the literature in the sense that we try to replicate all the results using a binary measure of political development. And at the other extreme, I mean, we just use a continuous version of this measure of political development. Okay, in between, so as increase comparability, basically, for a couple of other reasons, but basically to increase comparability, we also use three regimes. Okay, instead of democracy and non-democracy, we create intermediate hybrid category in the middle. Okay, and we just run these estimates with this kind of three avenues, if you want, three different ways. Okay, binary, continuous, and three regimes. In terms of econometric methodology, I mean, we have two main specifications, as I said. One of them is the elegant, which is the semi-clear et al. The other one is the simple, which is the ours. Okay. Then just to give you more meat, I mean, the elegant specification from Nauro et al. I mean, this is the 2019 paper that I was just talking about. I mean, it has more or less this form, and what it has is basically is loaded with country fixed effects and GDP lags. Okay, then that is it's quite elegant, parsimonious, can be estimated using 6 or 7 at least obvious estimators. Okay, and that is kind of the basic specification that the literature uses. I mean, in replicating this, what we kind of discovered is that the heavy lifting here is done by the country fixed effects. In addition to using the whole framework, what we try to do is instead try to simplify. Okay, then try to unpack the country fixed effects. It's not incredibly sophisticated, but we thought would be an interesting extension here, and it's a very modest contribution I have. Then what we do is we take out the country fixed effects and we add slow-moving country characteristics, things like legal origins and things that the country fixed effects should be picking up. Okay, then legal origins, language, religion, initial income, instead of the fixed effect. Okay, then these are the two main specifications that we'll be using. And one final issue, which I also I think already mentioned, I mean, how to report this, kind of in a succinct way. It could be econometric slides. I'll try to stress the few new results that we have. Okay, I'm gonna keep it simple and just tell you. I mean, by relaxing the 0-1 dummy variable assumption, what did you get? Okay, all right. Then let me show you the results, and we have 7 main results. Okay, that I'll kind of fly over now and tell you kind of stories about things that we find, and some of them we haven't seen in the rest of the literature. Okay, and that is the order. Okay, and the first one is of course the nonlinear relationship. Okay, then I mean using this is a set of results. It's kind of direct replication from the Nauro et al. JPE paper, and the important thing to pay attention to. This is also their preferred estimate. You can see this is autocracy and democracy. It is about 20% long run effect, 19.5. Okay, then I mean by relaxing the dummy variable approach to political development, I mean we do obtain a better fit and similar size effect of political regimes. Okay, and this is the first thing. The second thing is, as I mentioned, I mean, and this can be estimated in a number of ways. The second thing is if you try to unpack the country fixed effects, and the way we try to unpack the country fixed effects, as I suggested, is we bring in legal origins, fractionalization, whether or not country was a colony before, initial income, I mean, just slow-moving country characteristics, and I mean, is on top there. Then you obtain again, now, not 2020, I can see that, right? I mean, now democracy has a bigger payoff than autocracy, but still a nonlinear relationship between political and economic development. Okay. And this is the first set of results showing the establishment of a nonlinear relationship, and this is obtained with every single one of the estimators that have been used, at least in Asimov et al. 2019, and a few others that have been used in the literature. The second result that we think is quite, well, to the best of our knowledge, is novel, is this issue of night lights. Okay, and as I said, I mean, the idea is quite simple, and we think the most powerful criticism, potentially the most powerful criticism, is also simple, and basically can be presented with this question: what happens if dictators lie? Okay, what happens if the left side of the EU, right, systematically manipulate GDP figures? Okay. And this is, I mean, we tried a whole range of well-known and usual and kind of studied in this literature robustness concerns, but we do think that this is the killer one as far as we are concerned, because of course, if we estimate, and this is 20%, and somebody can show us that this is not actually 20%, it's minus 35, then the relationship goes back to linear, it's not usual. We think that this is simpler and potentially the most severe one. And this is, of course, quite important. There's quite a lot of current anecdotal evidence. I mean, we have China, kind of a highly autocratic regime, economic performance is slowing down. The number, it's not just the quality, but the number of economic statistics published going down. And this is kind of, this was in the Financial Times last week, so it's kind of current. But I mean, the real kind of damage that this concern can generate comes from a paper by, I hope you have seen it. We have been doing a lot of free publicity for this paper for the last 8 months, but I hope you have seen. It's a great paper. It's now forthcoming in Journal of Political Economy too, by Luis Martinez, who was a PhD at LSE, and he argues that dictators systematically lie about GDP figures, and the way he does that is by using satellite night data, okay, as a measure of economic activity, and then he contrasts that with actual published GDP figures and calculates the bias, and the bias that he estimates is about 35%. Okay, then the question here is whether or not, and there's of course the irony here that I don't need to be lost in the audience, that the whole literature justifies, I mean, I'm talking abstracts, just in the abstracts, not just in the abstract, justify the use of a dummy variable for democracy on the basis of measurement error. Okay, and the same concern, the same treatment, it has not been extended to economic activity. Okay, and as you can see, if you're thinking it's a U-shaped relationship, and this is 20 on the left-hand side, it's really, really, really damaging. Okay, and what we do is we re-estimate everything using night lights. Yes.
I'm not familiar with the literature at all. I'm struggling with something.
Yes.
Let's take the Philippines, right?
Yes.
Now, Philippines in the 60s until 1972 was a democracy,
Yeah.
and then it wasn't. And then it becomes a democracy again.
That's right.
And then, sure it is, or whatever. I mean, how do you do that? I mean, when you get the country fixed effects, maybe something's going to show up on that. But is that leading to any sort of measurement error?
Not measurement error. I think your discomfort is how you think about these results, right? And it will vary what estimator you're using, right? But if you come, the baseline is within the within estimator, then the way to think in that context is in terms of democratic transitions. Okay, then is a country that has become a democracy, right? Wasn't before, has become a democracy, and stayed a democracy for 20 years, because that is the window of the estimate, right? What is the economic payoff, right? And I mean, I'm being very candid here, because if I move to Adelana bond, for example. I mean, it's the first difference. Then you're thinking growth. You're not thinking levels anymore, right? And the transition disappears. But nevertheless, the core interpretation is the transition. Okay. Then the question is, you have two countries, right? I mean, if that's the thought experiments to kind of read this coefficient, these effects, right? You have two countries, both autocracies. One become a democracy, right? You saw them today. You look at them in 20 years' time, which one has highest level of per capita income and how much higher is that level of per capita income? Okay, and the answer, I mean, from the literature is.
Okay, I'm just trying, that country could go back and forth over that period of time quite a bit.
That's
So
right.
I'm just wondering if we need to look to see how institutions, what role maybe democracy plays in the construction of institutions.
That's right. Yes.
And
Yeah.
how that goes, like Thailand, which has gone in and out in terms of democracy, in terms of authoritarian, but the institutions have stayed relatively constant. I'm not sure.
Right. That is a slightly different issue. Yeah. I mean, the average number of transitions out of this 162 countries is 2.7. It's very low. I don't know if that doesn't.
But it's not
Answer your
a problem.
question, but I mean, it is not a major concern because in the country that has the most transitions, I mean, in 1960 and 2018, is Argentina. It never serves with 7, which, you know, if you know anything about Argentina, you thought to work more, right? 7 is a good number, but this issue is less severe than I'd like to think. Okay.
If I could just take so the measure of a democracy versus autocracy in this, you know, in the studies, they're 0-1 based on a point in time assessment of this particular country.
Absolutely right.
But then when it makes a transition, then the 0-1 becomes 0, it becomes 1 depending. And you reflect that against the performance at the end.
That's correct. That's correct. The point is that the underlying variable that I use it to make those calls are not habits, as I showed you at the beginning. I mean, they're all continuous. You see them. I don't want to.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, they are continuous, but people are concerned about measurement error. They're not concerned about measurement error when it comes to economic activity, which I think it's perhaps given the large sample that you're looking at, right? Perhaps it's an equally serious possibility, right? And you know, what they do is basically, I mean, what we also do is replicate these results. You just divide the countries in democracies or autocracies. Okay? Actually, I mean, yeah.
As you mentioned, Argentina, I can't really resist. You say that dictators systematically lie about statistics, right?
I mean, this is
No. Yeah, yes. Argentina is a case in point where a democracy systematically lies about statistics. So how do you describe this case? I mean, I could say Greece.
Yes, exactly.
Upon entering the euro,
Yeah, that's right.
or there are others. I mean, these are all democracies, right?
Well, are they? I mean, that is the question.
Well,
I mean, are they mature, well-established democracies, or are they? I mean, are they intermediate regimes?
Right. Yeah, that's
You see, that is the question. I mean, that is, you know, it's not Germany, right? Argentina is not France, not Italy.
Italy is not Germany, if you like.
Well,
But I mean, Greece is a member of the European Union, is a
That's
member
right.
of the euro, etc., etc. I mean, used to be a dictatorship in the 70s,
That's right.
but they lied about the statistics
That's
in
right.
the 2010s.
Yes.
Argentina used to be a dictatorship. I mean, we have to think of Argentina as a democracy in the noughts or in the tens,
Yeah.
I think.
Yes. Yeah.
They still lie systematically.
Yes.
So there must be cases. I mean, I was wondering if
Yeah.
you take those into account.
I mean, the way to take into account is to extend the range and stop classifying them as 0-1. that's how you take that into account.
Or you could test the hypothesis that politicians lie independent of regime.
Well, I mean, you can, but I mean, this is not what this paper finds, right? I mean,
It's not
right?
popular.
I mean, that paper tests exactly that hypothesis, right? They wrote, it's a great paper. It's all over the press. I wish I written it, but it's not the one I wrote. But I mean, that has been tested, right? I mean, I don't think they tested, of course. I mean, you know, with a continuous variable, maybe that is interesting, but nevertheless, I think that's how you would accommodate, just to be a bit more flexible on how you categorize democracy. Okay, all right, then I'll just fly over the other results there. I mean, I think this is the main concern, and of course, I mean, you run with night lights, and again, you have you know, evidence for a U-shaped relationship. Okay, one other thing here, potential concern is outliers. We just heard about Greece. Usually, I get the question about China. I didn't bring the Greece chart. I do have it, by the way. Unfortunately, I didn't bring the Russia chart either, or the Brazil chart. I do have all of them. I just want the Chinese chart because, I mean, as you can see, you know, by the companies, outliers are not an issue, right? And this is a massive concern when you're looking at the nonlinearities, right? There is one outlier here, of course, it's this one. This is one country, which here is Singapore. Okay, but I mean, if you take Singapore out, the EU becomes even more pronounced. Okay, then we'll leave it. But as you can see, I mean, everything is within, right? And we have a whole discussion, have more kind of technical results about outliers, but they do not seem to be a concern. And there are a couple of, I mean, this China, surprising to many people, that has remained as an autocracy for so long and growing very, very fast. The other graph that I usually bring, Greece, is Russia. Russia is also quite interesting because Russia is not a democracy and never been. And that has, I mean, it started out with the power of communism about here and has been moving this way ever since, with bumps for oil prices. But always moving in the wrong way, if you want. Okay, but anyway, then outliers are not an issue, and you know, can tell you a lot of stories about different countries. The other, I have 3 more interesting results, which I think I'll try to fly. There's a debate. Michael Kramer just published a paper on converging to convergence, in which he makes the point that the effect of political institutions decreasing over time. Okay, and Semoglu was the discussant, and Semoglu, as you can imagine, with the opposite. Well, we took that hint to generate some results too, using rolling windows, just to see whether or not these effects change it. It's U-shaped in the middle. At the very beginning, I mean, you can see that autocracies have a slightly bigger effect than democracies, but it is the opposite towards the end. Okay, then it is pretty much U-shaped. There's very little evidence from our results that the effect of political democracy is decreasing over time. It's either, you know, the same or increased, if you wish. Okay, and this is something that we can do. In terms of mechanisms, I mean, we have a whole range of social unrest and social political instability variables, and we find a number of them consistently, robustly playing a role here for the reasons that I explained before. We have very little evidence for you know, productivity and for human capital. In terms of instability, that is a little bit along the lines you're talking about. We find that the only really stable regime that does not need the adjective stable is democracies. Them, you know, if you look at transition probabilities, they stay there much more than any of the other two, for example. And then, I mean, you have to kind of choose a metric to identify which one is more unstable of the other two. Okay, but they are really, has implications of interpretation of the results, because the new shape it suggests that the dictatorships enjoy a 20% growth bonus, and that requires an adjective, which is stable autocracies. Autocracies that stick around long enough enjoy it, but the majority of them don't. Okay, and the final issue, I think somebody mentioned something that is also something that we haven't seen in the literature, and economists are not incredibly excited about this, but political scientists are, which are looking at different dimensions of democracy, right? And you asked a little bit about how to measure, and one of the common criticisms you hear is that there's emphasis on the majoritarian aspect. All the economist definitions about elections, basically, okay? And the quality variable, of course, there's only one measure of democracy that does not distinguish among any other dimension of democracy whatsoever, right? As a matter of fact, the criticism that it confounds the majoritarian aspect with others. The VDM has a number of dimensions of democracy, and I'm sure you can guess right now, it's U-shaped relationship shows up for each one of them. And there are about 5. There's electoral democracy, liberal democracy, participatory democracy, deliberative and egalitarian, each one with capturing different aspects. And for all of them, we observe a U-shaped relationship again. It changes a little bit depending on which one you're talking about. The electoral one is the one that is stronger, but nevertheless, the relationship, the shape of the relationship stays the same across dimensions. Okay, let me just conclude with a couple of broad conclusions. And the first one is that I think it's nice to focus on this hybrid political regimes in the sense that of bringing in the economics literature, things that political science have been talking about for 20 years or so, and hopefully that can push forward the economics literature. We don't think that our results, the political view, at all contradict the literature. I mean, it's as I mentioned before. I mean, the kind of headline finding here is that democracy grows faster or higher per capita income than non-democracy. Democracy is better than non-democracies, but we think it complements it in the sense of the possibility of looking at the democracy growth process as not linear. Then maybe talking about this democratic transition, then that is a plus, I presume. Another kind of benefit here is, I think, is regards the democratic backsliding of populism. If you look at the populist literature, I mean, it's very, very straightforward to measure the political and social costs, but it's very, very hard to measure the economic damage, the economic costs, among other reasons, because, I mean, these are very recent regimes, perhaps, but I mean, it still remains quite a challenge to measure, the economic costs of populism. Among the hybrid regimes, I mean, again, we're talking about Greece before. 3 weeks ago, the European Parliament passed the resolution that the current member state of the European Union is officially a hybrid electoral autocracy, not a democracy, right? I'm referring to Hungary, I believe. Then that type of this type of result gives some sort of economic rationale for that call, for that judgment, okay, which was, of course, carried out entirely on political grounds. And finally, I mean, the mechanism, I think that is the really kind of interesting benefit of all this exercise is because it all leads to the role of political instability in explaining this choice of regimes. And because the fact that it's so central in the theoretical literature, I think it's quite nice, right? I mean, we saw that the literature, the theoretical literature highlights SPI, highlights social political instability, social unrest, but the empirical results are quite weak. For us, I mean, this is the main mechanism.
Okay,
All right, yeah, I think I'll stop here then.
fine. We've got quite a bit of time left, so we can certainly. Thank you. So for this, we'll just have a mic here in case it's if you're not so audible to us, we may ask you to take the mic from over there. But those of you who are zooming in and would like to ask questions, the Q&A window has been open. It will stay open, and so far we have no such questions from our internet audience. But we welcome any questions that may arise between now and the time we talk. One of the things I wanted to just ask, just to open the Q&A, is the measure that you have. This is just mostly for clarification purposes. The measure that is used to characterize democracy versus autocracy, and then the in between. Right? You have two measures: the polity measure and the VDEM measure. So underlying that, that's not the 0-1 anymore, right? How do we sort of understand the what makes an in-between regime and in-between under those measures, just so that we can clarify what this continuous measure is now, what is extreme authoritarian versus extreme democracy, and how we understand the middles. Yeah, what goes into that is my question.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think the easiest way is, and I think most people know the polity measure, then I can use it as an example, right? The polity measure has been around now for about 20 years or so, and it's basically an indicator of democracy, political regimes, that combines two indexes. I mean, an index of autocracy and an index of democracy. The emphasis again is chiefly on elections, right? The participation for executive, for example, and whether or not elections are free, fair, this type of concern, and the VDEM is kind of a similar structure, but it's less well known. The polity measure is a categorical variable that goes from -10, which is a perfect autocracy, to +10, which is perfect democracy. And this is done by a number of political scientists, well-known political scientists, and they, on top of generating this combined index, they also have an additional category in the middle that they call anocracies, which is that they determine essentially. These are all judgments made by political scientists, right?
So that's why we have this spectrum. That's right. Of degree of regime, extreme, or the degree of democracy. That's right. And that is against that you have the smile representing the effect of the regime against either GDP growth or other measures. If you want to remove the possibility that the GDP measure is contaminated, then use something else like night lights and the like to show that is robust, that pattern is robust. Okay, so my follow-up question is just that the interesting thing is the middle, and at least, well, there's more than one interesting way, but to me, one of the interesting things is the middle is how does that become the lowest point of the GDP curve or the growth curve, and that is attributable to instability, you say, institutional transitions, and so on. And you have some regressions here that seem to indicate that. But is that less of a? It's kind of hard for me to understand if this is a regime, distinctively regime effect, because I don't know if an economy in transition is different, is the same thing as a hybrid democracy. So I'm not sure if the duration of the stability of the thing is partly then maybe that is what is the reason. These are not very stable regimes in the middle, and so they're never going to ever have high GDP growth. But is that only because they're switching from one endpoint to another? I don't know. What are your thoughts on how to interpret the middle?
Yeah, I mean, our story is focusing on political stability, right? Then that is the culprit. That is, I mean, we look at a whole range of potential channels that the literature has identified, and there's quite a lot of qualifications you can use, particular the results, some of them for productivity, for example. I mean, change quite a bit, because you can also say that the middle regimes are the less productive ones, right? Or have more trouble sustaining productivity. And that is true all the way to the global financial crisis, for example. Then, after the result kind of weakens quite a bit. And you have similar kind of qualifications for a number of kind of usual suspects to explain why the intermediate regimes perform so badly. But the one factor for which I mean the evidence is really, really strong is social unrest. And you have two corner regimes, if you want. Democracy has kind of a natural valve for instability, I presume. I mean, you don't like the government to change it every 4 years. And autocracy has a different way of dealing with that, which is to like the government to essentially put you in prison and kind of suppresses instability. There's also kind of a little bit of, I mean, we like to stress it because it naturally links with the previous theoretical literature, right? But there's quite I mean, we have a range of interesting results, sure, because we have a number of dimensions of political instability that are more prevalent in certain regimes. For example, strikes. General strikes are a feature of democracy and not a feature of autocracies, for example. Political assassinations, to give you another example, a feature of autocracies, but not of democracies. Then you can really not only have a number of political instability variables that perform consistently, as opposed to the example I gave you regarding productivity, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's a kind of a result. In addition, having some core stability variables that support the result, you also have a number of them that are quite intuitive to see how they behave in different political regimes. And I think the explanation we give is political stability. Stress it.
Questions from the yes, in the rear, please. Lady in green first.
Hi.
Thank you.
My name is Antonia Maioni, and I'm a visiting political scientist from McGill University. So I was very taken by your talk, very interested. Any day an economist says that Politics Matters is a good day for scientists, but I wanted to ask two questions. The first has to do with the, when you mentioned sort of the explanation for how politics or why politics affects economic development. You mentioned that because the sort of effect of democracy was structural reform, taxes, education. So these are often proxies for a political regime in which there is sort of an emphasis on not only democratization as such, but also equalization. I'm wondering if that is part of the explanation. So political regimes that actually are not only about growth and development, but also about having citizens share equally in those kinds, or as equally as possible in those kinds of benefits. My second question has to do with the graph you put up on, it was just after the night light. So the IV and outlier graph. So when you put the outlier graph up, it's not about the outliers though. What I'd like to know is if you could actually identify a country that is on both points, or like if you're looking at the U, at sort of the triangle, at the left, at the right, and at the south end. Just because I'm a comparativist, and so you know there might be something interesting to be able to highlight that political scientists could then look at in more qualitative terms to drill down on some of the political histories that take place during this time period that we live. Thank you.
Okay. So maybe we can look at the particular trash.
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. Really, both of them are very, very good, excellent questions. On the, I have bad news for you regarding the inequality results, because this literature has economics literature has looked very, very carefully at the number of papers looking at the role of inequality in this story, and we find very little support for it. The way that looking at our results, the way that it could match your concern a bit more closely is regarding these different dimensions of democracy, because there's a kind of an egalitarian dimension, and you can kind of try to compare the effects and see if there's a differential there, right? But in terms of inequality, income inequality per se, I mean the results are I don't recall I know about the productivity, the nuance, I don't recall the nuance regarding inequality, but they are not as strong as the other ones we have. And regarding the outliers, I mean, this is it's a very good question, because I mean what we have too on the autocracy is another way of saying what I said before is, I mean, you do observe this payoff, 20% for stable autocracies, but there are very few stable autocracies. I believe I said that. Then what this implies is that you also, it's like in economics, you have this literature about growth miracles and growth disasters, and that's what you have. So then you can identify countries, for example, top of the U, you can see, Brazil, 68, 73. You see, kind of spurs of growth under autocracies, for example, you see. And then, of course, it became kind of intermediate democracy by most accounts after 1985. And of course, with Bolsonaro after 2018, I presume it's one of the countries that has experienced the largest backsliding in democracy indicators the last few years. Then, I mean, you can identify points in the distribution along those lines. The kind of disappointing thing, right, is that because I mean the way of the econometrics is designed with all, especially the country fixed effects, right? That shouldn't. I mean, I think that's why, in a way, that's why they cannot pick them up as outliers, because that kind of aspect is already taken into account in the econometrics. But I mean, if you have to identify countries, and you're going to be looking, you're not going to be seeing countries. I mean, it's very, very rare. I mean, you can see that. I mean, even China. I mean, they all this 60 years of data, right? I mean, this is China. You know, the bottom number is China in 1960. Right? The green one, yeah, this one. This is China 1960. Oops. Let's go back. Okay, no worries. And you know, it's just China over time. Yeah. This is, you see, this is China 1960, not China 1970. You know, 61, 62. This is years. You see, you know, 1970, 1980. You see, then that is what you did. This is showing. You see, then it's going to be very difficult to pick, you know, one at each stage for a long period of time, right? I mean, you can for, you know, 5, 10 years, but not for, you know, 50, 40, 60 years. You see, and unfortunately, that leads you back to political instability as an explanation for the relationship.
Thank you.
We had a further question. I think the lady was going to ask it, may have left. Any, you know, please have a, you know, if you have any questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Alessandro Meri, I'm an associate fellow here. You partly answered this, talking about Brazil now in the last answer, but I'd be curious if looking at Brazil through the prism of your work. Of course, Brazil had this spurt of growth as an autocracy and another big spurt of growth at the beginning of this century as a democracy. In both cases, one could argue that a lot of other factors were at work in both cases, other than the political regime or the economic policy decisions. I'm thinking of, for instance, commodity pricing, this latest episode of growth. And I was wondering if you've already alluded to that, but if you've already looked at some of the effects of the backsliding, which you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation. I mean, Brazil seems to be exactly one of the cases where you see backsliding populism, retrocession in terms of democracy. Is it too early to measure that, or if you already looked at that, or what's your
Yeah. Well, I think it's a bit too early because these are very recent regimes. I think Bolsonaro is 2018.
4 years.
Yeah, right. You need the data to, which means it's not available yet. Then it's perhaps perhaps too early to, you know, put the populist dummy here because actually I think I have the. I mean, if you look at the classification of regimes from BDM, they do have an electoral autocracy classification, and you can see it's pretty stable until 2015. I have it in one of the additional slides, but it's going to be a struggle to find. So 88. Then, but if you go to the website, you can see the classification of regimes, and it just opens up at 2015, 2016, and it's very, very difficult. Well, Brazil is a beautiful case because I mean, you thought natural resources, right? But I mean, Lula government. I mean, this is Bolsa Família, right? It's big, redistributed. That's right. Well, Bolsonaro is finishing his government with a commodity boom too. Well, I mean, that's right, but it's quite difficult, right? I mean, the econometrics in theory is taking care of this because I mean you have all this country and near fixed effects that that's why it is very elegant, but we try to look at it as okay. I mean, can we unpack this because it's just too much, you see, and unfortunately, it's very difficult. It's really difficult. I mean, you know, it's a very it teaches a lot of the comparison between the specifications because I mean you think that they'll be the same, right? I mean, you know, factualization, language, ethnicity, whether we're a colony, initial income, religion. I mean, you know, what else?
Religion, Brazil is another case in point. It used to be a Catholic country.
Used to be.
Now the evangelical service.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. I see. Oh yes.
The
Yes.
evangelicals have huge
That's right.
political.
Yeah,
impact.
that's right. So, yeah, it's still Christian culture. Okay, all right, sorry. Yes, that's right. Yeah. That classification is not as kind of you know, refined as what you have in mind. You see, but I mean, nevertheless, I mean, you still have you know stuff unexplained there, and that is quite surprising for us. I mean, but you know, on the one hand, it's surprising, but I mean, you do that and you still get a U-shaped relationship there.
Further questions? Let me bring out sort of like an aspect of this that I was thinking about earlier, but I also see a little bit, possibly a little bit of this here. Is that the relationship between the level or the growth rate of GDP and the indices is non-linear. But I'm curious about the spread or the volatility of GDP growth in relation to the same index. And if I take China, for instance, I see a big range, right, from low to high, right? And I can't see necessarily what the other countries might look like, but I'm wondering if the reason why the mass at the end here is concentrated is because the variability of growth in democracies is not very high.
That's right.
As opposed to if you're at the democracies, which is an argument in favor of why you would prefer democracy. Never mind that even if well, here we see that on average the growth rates are higher for democracies, even though it's clear that the autocracies can produce better results in the intermediate regions, but the spread, which reflects to me like how unstable the growth experience will be.
Yeah, I refer to this.
This might not be so non-linear. It might actually still be linear in favor of democracies. I mean, I just eyeballing the.
Yeah, no. This is
scatter.
This is a great.
It's another
suggestion.
sort of
Yes,
like,
exactly.
perspective.
Yeah.
That, it's not what's being looked at in the
No.
paper, but I think it's also something related to that because
Most definitely.
Instability of GDP growth
Yes.
is another reason why you may have instability in the political regimes as well.
I mean, I'm thinking this financial crisis papers, and I mean, you can think in addition to, I mean, variability of GDP, you can standard deviation of consumption, for example.
Yeah, ultimately,
exactly. I mean, you can bring
Or
other
even the night
elements here.
lights. Even the night
Oh,
lights.
well, yes,
The
that's
night
right.
lights
That's
data
right.
might be
Yeah.
good too.
But I mean, what makes your question particularly interesting is that if you refer back to this growth miracles and growth disasters literature, is that democracy don't produce miracles, right? And which kind of reinforces your point about
Any further ideas, questions, comments, reactions? Random thoughts? I think it's a fascinating area of analysis myself, but it's not my particular area. I just I'm just curious about the latest. One of the other things I was thinking about in looking at this is some of the literature on dynasties, political dynasties, because if you have an autocracy, it can become more stable because the political dynasties are there, but this is tied up with the distribution of income in the such autocracies where that can be very concentrated, so they have a means to perpetuate
Mm.
the,
Mm.
you know, the autocracy. So the stable autocracies have that feature, but then economic thinking would be that they would not be very high growth, and yet maybe they are because of the stability.
Yeah. No, because of, you mean the,
Because the dynastic
Yeah.
character will maintain the stability, and that offsets the productivity losses that happen because you're not, you may not be.
yeah, I'll have
But
to
it's just a,
Yeah.
just, you know, just
Yeah.
another idea that came to mind as I was thinking about some of the aspects of this, because it's also a question of how stable you are, and then that's why the endpoints here, you tell me, are more like the stable autocracies and stable democracies, and the in-betweens are more where the transition or hybrids regimes are, which are much less stable.
I'm just, I mean, I don't know how many dynasties you have in this sample, but what your question brought to.
No, I'm more in terms of like the generically, how do you perpetuate yourself as an autocracy?
Yes, exactly. I mean, you
have to have some kind
no,
of,
not your family, but
Yeah.
yes. I was just thinking,
that could be one other regressor if you had the data, I guess. Or it might be at the channel whereby
Yeah.
you have instability.
right. I mean, or leadership, or I mean, what is coming to mind is this literature on selection of leaders in democracies. And there's quite a few papers by economists. Tim Besley, for example, has written on, you know, whether or not democracies choose more educated leaders, for example, right? That is kind of a different angle of a different way of understanding your question, I presume, because that will kind of lead to, you know, more educated, more competent, hopefully, better economic policies, and that will be the channel. But that's an interesting angle.
I had a question.
On the,
I was wondering if you could touch more, oh, didn't mean that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could touch more on the empirical results around the mechanism. You said they consistently and robustly play a role. Could you talk a little bit more about what those look like?
sorry,
The mechanism?
the empirically his findings about the mechanism for the, for why.
Yes, I think it was point number 5 out of 7.
Sure, some, I mean, I don't think I have all of them here, but I mean, this is kind of just an illustration on the range of results, you see. Then, you know, what you can see in the first two columns is that, again, there's very little evidence on productivity. We have more tables in the paper on this. Then this is just kind of, to show that we have a range of political stability, not to show that we don't have results on the rest. And you can see the next columns 3, 4, 5 on education. We have the same thing for, as I mentioned before, inequality, also very weak support, but all of this with qualifications, right? I mean, I believe that in the paper, this table has a bottom part that is 1960 to 2010, and then the productivity kind of comes up, okay, but not in this case. But regarding your question here, you just have kind of a small range of variables, and these are actually not the variables, for example, that you find in, if you look at the Semoglu, the 2019 paper, they do have kind of an index of political stability. That it's not in this table, but we have it in some other place in the paper. And what this debate is to say that, you know, for kind of overall measures of political stability, they are we find them to be very robust in this setup. Right? And then, I mean, we have quite a few more, but we'll have to dig them. Here are the things I mentioned to you before that you see, you know, there are no general strikes on column 9. You see, kind of strikes kind of okay in democracies, but definitely not okay in autocracies. For example, in purges the other way around. You see, these are kind of cabinet purges, that are kind of wiping out your regime opposition, right? I mean, being okay in autocracies, but not in democracies. Same thing with revolutions. You see them, and for riots and the government, anti-government demonstrations, you have a U-shaped relationship. You have this with a number of other kind of political stability variables, but with this, you also have the core and the nuance. That's why we stress it. Yeah. And the threat of revolution is difficult to measure. They don't have it yet.
Yeah.
If there are no further questions, then we can close out and conclude, and thank our guest, Professor Nauro Pereira Campos, for giving us this co-author's insights into this enduring exploration of the relationship between economics and democracy and or the lack thereof. Thank you so much. And on behalf of everybody here, welcome to Bologna Precise in particular.
All right, thank you very much for that. Oh, no, it's okay. It's okay. No, no.